3,000 miles. That is how far China's nuclear tunnel network stretches beneath the Earth right now. Longer than the entire interstate highway system crossing 11 American states. Western intelligence agencies did not see it coming. They were not surprised. They were shocked. The Pentagon's 2023 report forced ALBA analysts to throw out every prior assumption about Chinese nuclear capacity. For decades, China operated under a doctrine of minimum deterrence, a small arsenal, just enough to guarantee retaliation. That doctrine is gone. The shift happened underground, largely unseen. For years, the tunnels exist. The warheads are inside them, right now. The Chinese military calls it the Underground Great Wall. More than 3,000 miles of hardened tunnels, blast-resistant walls, and compartmentalized chambers built specifically to house nuclear warheads and mobile intercontinental ballistic missiles. That scale alone is staggering. But the true implication is what keeps Western strategists awake at night. Mobile missile launchers inside this network can disappear on ground, travel kilometers in any direction, and re-emerge at completely unpredictable locations. That means preemptive targeting becomes nearly impossible. You cannot destroy what you cannot find. The tunnels themselves are engineered to survive near-miss nuclear strikes. They are not just deep. They are hardened, reinforced, and deliberately compartmentalized, so that a single hit cannot cascade through the entire system. And this is not ancient infrastructure. Satellite imagery from Planet Labs and Airbus confirmed rapid, large-scale modernization of Cold War-era facilities in Sichuan province. New blast-resistant bunkers were documented. Plutonium core production complexes appeared in imagery as recently as 2023. China built an entirely new strategic architecture beneath the surface of the Earth, and the West was reading the wrong map. But the tunnels were only the beginning. What analysts discovered inside one specific mountain in Chongqing would redefine the meaning of the word massive entirely. Picture a mountain, not a hollowed-out movie set, not a Cold War bunker retrofitted into a tourist attraction. An entire mountain gutted from the inside, transformed into a functioning military-industrial complex the size of a small city. That is Project 816, and it sits in the hills near Fuling, Chongqing, quietly holding the title of the largest man-made tunnel complex ever constructed on this planet. The numbers alone are staggering. 104,000 square meters of underground space, carved entirely through solid rock. That is roughly 26 American football fields, end zone to end zone, all buried inside a single mountain. The tunnel network running through it stretches across 18 individual passageways, with the main corridor running nearly 100 meters high at its peak. This was not a bunker. It was an underground city built for one purpose: producing plutonium for nuclear warheads and surviving anything the Soviet Union could throw at it. The authorization came directly from Premier Zhou Enlai in 1966, at the exact moment the Sino-Soviet split was tearing apart what had once been the world's largest communist alliance. Beijing genuinely believed Moscow might launch a nuclear first strike. The answer was not to negotiate. The answer was to disappear underground. Project 816 became the crown jewel of China's Third Front Initiative, a sweeping Cold War program that relocated critical military infrastructure deep into China's interior mountain ranges, away from coastal exposure, away from Soviet missile trajectories, away from any map the West was reading at the time. Building it required a workforce that defies easy comparison. More than 60,000 PLA engineering soldiers were assigned to the project across 18 years of continuous construction. 60,000. That figure exceeds the standing army of dozens of sovereign nations. These were not civilian contractors with union breaks and safety inspections. These were military engineers operating under strict secrecy, drilling and blasting through solid rock for nearly 2 decades. Many of them never telling their own families what they were building or where they were doing it. The engineering inside is where the story gets genuinely unsettling. Project 816 was designed to house a fully operational nuclear reactor, and that reactor needed cooling. The solution was breathtaking in its audacity. Engineers routed the cooling system to draw water directly from the Wujiang River, which runs along the surface above the complex. The reactor itself sits 30 meters below the riverbed, 30 meters of rock separating an active nuclear reactor from a flowing river, all of it invisible from the surface, all of it operational. Construction was halted in 1984 when Deng Xiaoping ordered a military spending reduction, leaving the facility roughly 80% complete. It was declassified and partially opened to tourists in 2010. The Chinese government now charges admission. They let visitors walk the main corridor and photograph the reactor chamber. The openness is almost disarming. But Project 816 was never just a facility. It was a proof of concept. China had demonstrated it could build nuclear infrastructure at a scale and depth that made external verification nearly impossible. The question that followed was devastating in its simplicity. If one mountain could hide all of this, what was hiding inside the other mountains? And it would take a researcher at Georgetown University, working entirely from public sources, to force the Western intelligence community to confront an answer it had been avoiding for decades. In 2008, a man named Philip Carber sat down with a pile of satellite images, a collection of Chinese military publications, and a research team of graduate students at Georgetown University. No classified clearance, no government access, no insider sources, just open data, methodical analysis, and 3 years of work that would eventually detonate inside the United States intelligence establishment like a slow-moving grenade. Carber was not a fringe figure. As president of the Potomac Foundation, he had spent decades as a serious strategic analyst with deep roots in Western defense thinking. When he turned his attention to China's underground Great Wall, he approached it the way a structural engineer approaches a building. Systematically, exhaustively, following every public thread until the shape of the whole thing became visible. The mechanism of his investigation was straightforward but relentless. His team cross-referenced commercial satellite imagery against references in Chinese military academic journals, state media reports, and engineering publications. Every tunnel entrance visible from orbit was logged. Every reference to construction timelines, workforce deployments, and facility expansions in Chinese sources was cataloged. The picture that assembled itself over 36 months was not what anyone in Washington had been prepared to see. Carber's 2011 study concluded that the tunnel network spanned approximately 3,000 miles. 3,000 miles of hardened underground passageways, large enough to move vehicles, large enough to store weapons, large enough to hide an arsenal of a size that Western analysts had never seriously modeled. His estimate of the network's potential capacity landed like a thunderclap. The tunnels, Carber assessed, could potentially house approximately 3,000 nuclear warheads. The prevailing Western consensus at that time placed China's total nuclear stockpile somewhere between 200 and 400 weapons. Carber was not suggesting a modest revision. He was suggesting the entire baseline assumption was wrong by a factor of 10. The reaction from official Washington was immediate and dismissive. U.S. officials pushed back publicly, calling the estimates speculative and unsupported by hard intelligence. The arms control community largely echoed that skepticism. For a brief period, Georgetown's study looked like it might be filed away as an academic outlier, the kind of provocative paper that generates conference discussion and then disappears. It did not disappear. Quietly, without public announcement, U.S. government estimates of China's nuclear capacity began moving upward, not to 3,000, but the direction of travel was unmistakable, and it was Carber's direction. The intelligence community had been confronted with a structural problem it could not simply dismiss. If an unclassified research team working from public sources could map 3,000 miles of tunnels, What did that say about 17 years of professional intelligence collection that had largely failed to frame the question correctly? Carber himself was direct about the implication. This was not a gap in Chinese transparency. This was a failure of Western analysis. The tunnels had been there. The evidence had been publicly available. The framework for understanding what they meant had simply never been built. One Georgetown study cracked the foundation of Western nuclear accounting, and the numbers underneath were far larger than anyone had admitted. Buried beneath the Qinling Mountains, roughly 86 miles east of the ancient city of Xi'an, sits a facility that the United States government refused to name publicly for decades. The mountains themselves are the first layer of defense. Ancient granite ridgelines rising thousands of feet, pressing hundreds of meters of solid rock directly above whatever lies beneath. Nature built the vault. China filled it. This is the 22 base, and according to the Pentagon's October 2023 annual China Military Power Report, it is the single largest underground nuclear storage facility in China's entire arsenal. The logic behind the location is straightforward and brutal. Placing a nuclear storage facility in China's deep interior means any adversary attempting a first strike faces a compounding series of problems. The warheads are far from coastlines, far from carrier strike group ranges, far from the forward-deployed air assets that would form the leading edge of any conventional attack. The Qinling Mountains add geological shielding that no engineer could replicate artificially at any reasonable cost. Hundreds of meters of solid rock above a facility doesn't just absorb blast pressure, it defeats bunker-busting munitions that have penetration limits measured in tens of meters, not hundreds. The 22 base sits beyond the reach of most conventional strike packages almost by geography alone. The Pentagon's 2023 report marked a significant threshold. It was the first time United States officials publicly named and precisely located this specific facility. That detail matters enormously. Intelligence agencies had almost certainly known about the 22 base for years, possibly decades. The decision to keep that knowledge classified, to avoid naming it in open-source documents, reflected a long-standing institutional reluctance to force a public confrontation with what China's nuclear program actually looked like at scale. The October 2023 disclosure ended that reluctance, at least partially. The name was now on paper, the location was now on record. What the report described was not a modest storage depot. The 22 base represents the apex of China's physical nuclear infrastructure. The facility where warhead storage capacity, geological protection, and interior positioning converge into a single hardened complex designed to survive scenarios that would destroy virtually any other military installation on Earth. The Qinling Mountains don't just hide the facility. They protect it in a way that makes the facility functionally immune to the opening moves of any conceivable first strike scenario. And the 22 base doesn't operate in isolation. It connects to the broader logic of the entire underground network. A system where tunnels move warheads, bases store them, and geography shields everything from the kind of satellite surveillance that would otherwise allow an adversary to track, target, and destroy a nuclear arsenal before it could ever be used. The Georgetown study had estimated the tunnel network's capacity. The Pentagon's 2023 report named the crown jewel sitting inside it. But while analysts were still processing what the storage infrastructure meant, satellite imagery analysts on the other side of the Pacific were staring at something happening above ground in the western desert. And what they were seeing was being built at a pace that had no modern equivalent outside the Cold War. Sometime around 2021, commercial satellite imagery analysts began noticing unusual patterns of construction activity scattered across the remote desert regions of western China. The images showed freshly disturbed earth, heavy equipment, circular excavations appearing across vast stretches of arid terrain in organized, repeating patterns. At first glance, from altitude, the construction sites looked almost agricultural. Neat rows of identical disturbances spread across the landscape with geometric regularity. They were not farms. They were silos. Hundreds of individual ICBM silo fields. Confirmed under active construction, spread across China's western desert at a scale that had no modern precedent outside the nuclear arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. The mechanism behind a silo field strategy is layered and deliberate. Each individual silo is hardened, engineered specifically to survive near-miss nuclear detonations, meaning an adversary cannot simply target the field with a single weapon. Destroying a silo field requires dedicating multiple warheads to each individual silo, dramatically multiplying the offensive resources required to neutralize it. This is called a targeting burden, and building hundreds of silos imposes that burden at a scale that strains even the largest nuclear arsenals. Each silo is also capable of launching intercontinental ballistic missiles directly at targets on the continental United States. The silo fields and the tunnel network are not competing strategies. They are complementary ones. Fixed silos are visible. Adversaries can find them, target them, and in a first strike scenario, attempt to destroy them for launch. That visibility is not a flaw. It is a function. The silos exist to absorb incoming warheads, to force an attacker to spend missiles destroying empty holes in the ground, while the mobile tunnel-based missiles survive underground, invisible, and ready to retaliate. The entire architecture forces any adversary calculating a first strike to confront an impossible arithmetic problem. The numbers attached to this expansion are stark. The United States Department of Defense projects that China's warhead stockpile will surpass 1,000 warheads by 2030. That projection represents a roughly five-fold increase from approximately 200 warheads estimated just a decade prior. The Federation of American Scientists and the Arms Control Association both tracked the trajectory independently, arriving at figures consistent with Pentagon assessments. The silo fields alone, if fully loaded, would require warhead production at a pace China had never previously attempted or acknowledged. What made the silo field discovery particularly significant was the timeline. Construction visible enough for commercial satellite operators to identify and publish began around 2021, meaning the physical expansion of China's nuclear infrastructure was accelerating at precisely the moment Western governments were still publicly describing China's arsenal as modest, limited, and fundamentally defensive in orientation. The silos were being built in the open. The satellites were watching, the reports were being written, and somewhere in a classified annex of the United States intelligence community, analysts were also tracking something far more specific. A single event at a single location that, if confirmed, would change every calculation about what China's nuclear program had already achieved. The Xinjiang Desert in late June 2020 was silent in the way only truly remote places can be. No cities for hundreds of miles. No witnesses, just rock, sand, and the buried infrastructure of China's most secretive nuclear test site, Lop Nur. And then, on June 22nd, something happened beneath that desert floor that sent a tremor not just through the earth, but through the entire American intelligence apparatus. A seismic monitoring station in Kazakhstan picked it up first. A magnitude 2.75 event, registering approximately 450 miles from the Lop Nur test site, small enough that most automated systems would file it away as geological noise. But U.S. intelligence analysts didn't file it away, because the signature wasn't quite right for a natural event, and the location wasn't quite right for a coincidence. What they were looking at, according to American intelligence assessments, was the fingerprint of a covert nuclear explosive test. The alleged yield fell in the hundreds of tons range, not the megaton-class detonations of Cold War testing, but a deliberate, precisely calibrated yield-producing event, small enough to hide, large enough to count. The concealment method alleged by U.S. intelligence has a technical name: decoupling. The principle is straightforward, but the engineering is extraordinary. When a nuclear device detonates inside a sufficiently large underground cavity, the surrounding air absorbs a portion of the shockwave before it ever reaches the rock. the seismic signal that escapes to the surface is dramatically reduced. Some estimates suggest by a factor of 70 or more compared to a standard underground test. A weapon that would normally register as a magnitude 5 event gets compressed down to something that looks like a minor tremor. It doesn't disappear. It just looks like the Earth settling. China has had decades to perfect this infrastructure at Lop Nur. The site has hosted 45 nuclear tests since 1964, and its tunnel networks are among the most extensively developed underground test facilities on the planet. The cavity engineering required for decoupling isn't improvised. It's built. It's prepared. It waits. If the June 2020 event was what U.S. intelligence believed it to be, it would constitute a direct violation of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, a treaty China signed in 1996 and has publicly championed as a cornerstone of non-proliferation. The CTBT has never formally entered into force, but its monitoring network, the International Monitoring System, exists precisely to catch events like this one. It apparently almost missed it, and for nearly 6 years, the evidence sat inside classified channels, known to analysts, known to senior officials, but not spoken aloud in public, until one man decided the silence had lasted long enough. What Christopher Yao did on February 17, 2026, wasn't just a disclosure. It was a declaration that the rules of engagement had changed. Standing before a Washington, D.C. audience, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Arms Control became the first American government official to formally and publicly present intelligence evidence of a Chinese covert nuclear test. The 2020 Lop Nur event, the seismic anomaly, the alleged yield, the decoupling technique specifically engineered to blind international monitoring systems, was now on the record. China, Yao made clear, had not simply been building faster than anyone admitted. It had been testing while pretending it wasn't. The framing mattered as much as the facts. This wasn't presented as a single accusation against a single event. It was presented as evidence of a systemic failure, a nation operating entirely outside the verification frameworks the rest of the world had agreed to uphold. The international monitoring system had been evaded. The CTBT had been treated as a formality, and the warhead numbers climbing toward the 2030 milestone made the timeline feel less like a projection and more like a countdown. The disclosure wasn't an accident of timing. With silo fields still under active construction and the window for any meaningful arms control dialogue narrowing by the month, American officials were signaling something with unusual clarity. The era of quiet concern was over. What came next would happen not in intelligence briefings or classified annexes, but in the formal diplomatic arena where accusations carry consequences and the breakdown of one framework can unravel all the others. Geneva, April 2026. The United States formally accused China, on the record, of conducting the largest opaque nuclear expansion in modern history. China's ambassador rejected every word. No verification exists. No inspector can enter those facilities. The New START framework was built for 2 powers, not 3. It collapsed in that room. Subscribe to see what happens next.